Hello again. It's such an honor to be back to finish up this presentation, hopefully today. And so this would be part 3 of the presentation, Ancient Africa through the lenses of Ancient Egypt. And so I want to go ahead and share my screen with you. And again, I do welcome you again to this presentation. I'm always honored anytime I'm able to present this information. So I want to, again, every time just give a disclaimer because I do show videos. And so I want to make sure that I put this out there. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is the use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. And before I move on, I also want to apologize for a lot of the spelling errors and maybe some of the mispronunciations that I have done so far. Okay, so I'm going to work on that. I'm going to correct that in the future. And so I do apologize for that, okay? So I want to, we stopped with, I'm gonna share my screen with you at this time, okay? Okay. So we stopped here with Hypatia, and we shifted and we talked about the fact that she was a mathematician and a philosopher. And then we stopped with this one. Now, the reason why you might say, okay, well, why would you stop with this one when it's older? I should have started with this first. Well, the reason why I chose to do this is because if you remember, I ended off talking about how there were women who preceded, right? Who we don't know, who made contributions. That names we may not, we won't ever know, right? But their impact is definite, is seen, okay? And we're the benefactors of those things. And so this is the Ishago bone, and this is an ancient African mathematics in a sense. And underneath that, it says women as the first mathematicians and astronomers. Now, if we look at this bone, we see notches on those bones, on this particular bone, okay? And this bone, check it out, goes back 20,000 years, okay? So it's 20,000 years old, which is extremely old. So we know, based upon, at least in Africa, if you were just to look at this, that Africans were practicing mathematics, okay? Based upon the notches in their arrangements. And so this comes from Seven Little White Lies, The Conspiracy to Destroy the Black Self-Image by Ozazi Jabari, or Jabari Ozazi. And Jabari, if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, please forgive me, okay? So I want to read what he has in the book, and this is on page 37. Scholars stated that these tallies on the bone could represent a lunar calendar meant for tracking a woman's menstrual cycle. So based upon the grouping of these notches, scholars have come to the conclusion that it was done by women, which makes sense, right? And we're going to look at that in the next slide. But I do want to read a little bit more about this in his book, and I do recommend his book, Brother Jabari Ozazi book, because it's a really great book, and I enjoy it a lot. And he talks about this bone, okay? Now, here's the thing. So we know that this bone goes back, it's at least 20,000 years old. But in his book on page 37, the Limbombo bone, right, is 43,000 to 44,000 years old. So even before this bone, we have bone that is similar with notches that demonstrates a woman keeping count of her menstrual cycle, right? And that predates this by at least 20,000, 23,000 So years, okay? So women have been practicing before Hypatia, before Lady Priscilla. We have been practicing mathematics out of necessity. Okay, it wasn't just because we were just curious. No, we needed to know what time it was. Okay, when that cycle was coming back again. So I want to read this. Interestingly, the bone also attaches a fibula of a baboon. It has a short piece of cortex attached to one end. The notch system on the ishago bone seems to be much more complex than its predecessor. So even though we know that the Lubumbo bone predates this by 23,000 years, we can see that the women in their precision and preciseness were getting better, okay, to get more precise. It was more complex, okay? It's featured 3 columns, okay, grouped in tallies. Scholars differ on whether these tallies represent numerical systems or a lunar calendar. Okay, so now they don't know which one it is, okay, which might have been used to track the female menstrual cycle. It is possible again, and this is interesting that Brother Jabari puts this in here. It is possible again that the world's earliest mathematicians, astronomers were African women. Now I want to go to the next slide. So now, the moon and the menstrual blood connection. Okay, so we're talking about African women, we're talking about Black women, we're talking about science. A woman's typically has her menstrual cycle, okay, every 28 days or so, okay, give or take, okay? So when we look at the Ishago bone and Lubumbo bone, the moon makes a complete orbit around Earth with respect to a fixed star about once every, check this out, 27.3 days. So now, if you needed to track your cycle, and your cycle seems to match the cycle of the moon, right? You would use that as a calendar to track it. I mean, very simple, right? However, because Earth is moving in its orbit around the sun at the same time, it takes slightly longer for the moon to show the same phase to Earth, which is about 29.5 days. So naturally, this would have been a great calendar, like I said, for a woman monthly cycle. Okay. So now we have the evidence of early women mathematicians. We have women in ancient Egypt. We have Hypatia. We have women warriors. We have all of these great women who preceded us that helped us along the way. Okay. So now I want to get back to more modern times. We talked about a lot of great women. Okay. We cannot end this section of the presentation without discussing Queen Nzinga. Okay. And this powerful woman around 1583 AD played an important role when it came during the time of the Portuguese and the slave trade. So I want to read some things and this comes from the same book, Black Women in Antiquity by Ivan van Sertima. Sister of the reigning king in Dongo from present-day Angola, okay? She was from a militant ethnic group called the Jagas. She never accepted the Portuguese conquest in her country, so she wasn't having it, okay? She was a fighter. She formed an alliance with the Dutch against the Portuguese, okay? She would single out slaves and slave soldiers who were under Portuguese control. Now that's look, if you was a traitor, okay, she didn't let you slide. She pointed you out. Appealing to their pride to be Africans. Now this is the diplomatic prestige and the diplomatic appeal that she had. Appealing to their pride to be Africans, she offered them land and freedom. This resulted Uh, this resulted desertions of thousands of slave soldiers who joined her forces. So she promised them freedom. She promised them, hey, look, if you come join forces, you can get your freedom. And she was able to gain African forces within her military. Okay, so I want to read a little bit more about this powerful Queen Nzinga. And this, of course, is in the same book. And you see how many times I reference this book. If y'all can go and buy it, I do recommend it. And this is on page 130. And I just want to read this paragraph real briefly. So this is Queen Nzinga. Her most enduring weapon was her personality. Okay. She was astute and successful in consolidating power. She was particularly good at safeguarding her position by ruthlessly dealing with her foes and graciously rewarding her friends. So she wasn't, even though she had a great personality, she was still about business, I guess. You see what I'm saying? She was kind and sweet, but at the same time, when she had to be forceful, she did that. Okay. She possessed both masculine hardness and feminine charm, which she readily used depending on the need and the occasion. Because of these attributes, her leadership was never seriously challenged. So she was a great warrior, diplomat. She knew how to handle foes and she knew how to protect her friends. And because of that, it was hard for her position to be challenged. Okay. And so, there's so much more to say about her, but because of time, I'm going to move on. So now we talked about Queen Nzinga, and now we're closer to this. We're in the slave period. Okay. So we know that the Portuguese are in there. So now we start having a lot more women warriors, coming up to protect the land. And many people, before I get to that, Amazon warriors in particularly, is nothing new in the ancient world. And matter of fact, people like Siculus, Diodorus Siculus, even mention the Amazons in the Greek legends. Okay, so these are women warriors that they talked about, and I want to just briefly read a little bit about them before we get to more of the Dahomey women that you see this sister right here with the sword. Okay, so I want to read about the legend quickly before we get to more modern times. So according to Diodorus, the Amazons, supposedly of Africa, formerly lived in Libya. So these are Africans, according to the Greek Siculus. These Amazons, even then, were Black women living in Libya. But according to the story, they disappeared several generations before the Trojan War, while those of Thermodon in Asia Minor still flourish. There had been in Libya several races of women warriors. Among were the Gorgons, against whom Perseus fought. To the west of Libya, at the edge of the earth, there are people governed by women. So I wanted to briefly say that. I want to briefly just mention that. And of course, he goes all into Horus and all these different legends within the Amazon, which I'm not going to get to today. But I wanted to make that point so that when we talk about the Dahomey women, okay, when we talk about these women, it may be something of a legend and something of a history that preceded them, that Siculus was talking about. So this is not something that's new to the African. In Libya, okay, and other different ethnic groups of warrior women, they had the legend that already preceded them. And so I think that's important for us to understand. So now we're getting back to the modern era. Okay, so we talked about Queen Nzinga. When the Portuguese came in, she had to defend her people. And I want y'all to see throughout this presentation that sometimes women have to step up. You know, we're not the first people necessarily to do it, but when we have to, we take care of business, just like Queen Hatshepsut, right? Queen Nzinga. So you have two people from different parts of Africa, women stepping up, and you know, I could give other, you know, women but for the reason and the purpose of time, I can't give them all. Okay, so now let's look at this. First of all, let's just look at this picture. Now, I don't see one face that's smiling. All of them look like they're protecting their queen, they're protecting their king, even the brothers, all of them right here. Now, he's kind of smiling a little bit, but for the most part, that smile is not always what you think it is. It's like, okay, we smiling, but at the same time, don't start nothing, right? So these are some serious female warriors. So let's read this. The Dahomey female warriors. Tasi Hangbi was a stateswoman who ruled the kingdom of Dahomey, present-day Benin, from 1708 to 711. Among her achievements was the founding of the Dahomey's all-women battalion, the Egodijas, commonly referred to as the Dahomey Amazons. So now, if y'all laughing at me, y'all should be ashamed of yourself. I'm trying my best to pronounce these names. But the point here is this. This woman, this stateswoman, put a battalion together of women to protect Benin. I don't think she would have done that if she didn't think that the women were qualified to do the job. And when we read about some of the things that the Dahomey women, you know, they have some pictures of the Dahomey women holding decapitated heads. I didn't want to put that on this presentation. But in other words, these women were about protecting their land, protecting their people, okay? So now, when we see images of the Black Panther in 2018, of these fierce women, okay, it's not all fairy tale. It's based on truth. It's based on truth, based upon the Dahomey warriors. And then it's also based upon some of the legends of Diodorus Siculus, of African women, strong warrior women. And now we know today, for some of you who may have not known, that even before that, we have Queen Hatshepsut, who was a warrior queen, a pharaoh. So within the Black woman, and I believe it in women in general, there is sweetness, kindness, beauty, but we can also be warriors if we need to be. So when we look at Disney Black Panther 2018, I want you to remember these powerful women right here. Okay, remember these powerful women in men that fought side by side to protect their nation, protect their people, to protect their king and their queen. All right. So now we get to the point of the presentation. And I think you probably kind of saw some of it as we begin to move from the beauty of the cosmology, all right, how the Africans saw the woman through the lenses of ancient Egypt, the matrilineal society that was not only in East Africa, but throughout all of Africa. That's not to say that every tribe was matrilineal. No, they had some patrilineal and patriarchal tribes in Africa as well. Okay, so I don't want to just say it's all matrilineal, but a lot of the majority of them were a matrilineal society. We saw the beauty and the power of many of the queens, many of the Atmos Nefertari of the 17th dynasty, Queen Hatshepsut of the 18th dynasty, Queen of Sheba. We talked about Candace queens. You know, we talked about all of these different warriors Queen Nzinga, the beautiful mathematician of Lady Hypatia, the great doctor and physician, Lady Preset. So it's so much that we can say, man, look at, during this time period, not every woman was as lucky, was as blessed as, we talked about the Black women in Egypt having more rights, owning land. She was able to have her own business, right, as in the marketplace. So she had women in this time, in doing this, in this particular area and period, has so much that other women did not have. Okay. So now there was stages of when women began to lose some of those rights. Okay. You had the Islamic invasion that began to strip some of those rights away from women. Okay. But you still had segments, even within that, of places like Ghana and other nations that still held some of the matrilineal practices, and women still had some form of rights and dignity. And the nations themselves still had sovereignty. And I think that's also very important, that sovereignty of nations that's important in the protection of women. But now we have to get to the part of the presentation where we talk about the fall of Africa and the Black woman. Okay. So now there's so many things that happen to the Black woman and to the African nation. We talked about Egypt being this pinnacle of a nation during that time period. When Assyria came, it started the downfall. Then, of course, the Persians came. Okay, so we're talking about around 711 AD, Persians around 600, 500, BC, not AD, BC. Okay, and this begins to just strip away the Africans and particularly the Egyptians' rights. And then you have the Greeks with Alexander, 332 BC, that came in and began to take and change things within Egypt itself, all of these invasions back to back. And then Rome eventually comes in around 30 BC. All right. And then we have, like I said, the Islamic invasion. And then finally, we have the slave trade on the Portuguese around the 13th, 12th century, 14th century, that kind of just put a really big dent on African people, African men and African women. So all of these invasions, the fall of Africa through the series, all the way from 700 BC, all the way to the 14th and 15th century, that affected the Black family, affected Black men, but it affected Black women in a tremendous way, okay? So now, the African Holocaust. The African Holocaust is something that we talk about, but it's something that we really don't, and I'm looking around because I want to read something. I want to read something about this. And the African Holocaust was something that was very devastating. And I think that in many ways, we as African people are still, we have not healed 100% from that. We have not healed from that Holocaust. Okay. And so I want to read Now, this is a book from John Henry Clark, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. African slave period is best known to us because of its best documented. Okay. However, these documents are often confusing because they were created by people who were trying to justify the slave trade. Most people, especially Europeans, who created most of the documents on slave trade, write about the subject with the intent to make the victim of slavery feel guilty, to the vindicated the perpetrators of the slave trade. This is probably more dishonesty related to the interpretation of this subject than any other subject known to man. The African slave trade, like African history, is often written about but rarely understood. This misunderstanding probably grows out of the fact that we nearly always start the study of the African slave trade in the wrong place. The germ, the motive, the rationale for the African slave trade started in the minds of the European in the 15th and 16th centuries. The slave trade could not have started at all had there been no market for it. Okay. The story of the African slave trade is essentially the story of the consequence of the second rise of Europe. In the years between the passing of the Roman Empire in the 8th century and the partial unification of Europe through the framework of the Catholic Church in the 15th century, Europeans were engaged mainly in internal matters. With the opening of the New World and the expulsion of the Arabs and the Moors from Spain during the later parts of the 15th century, the Europeans started to expand beyond their homeland into the broader world. They were searching for new markets, new materials, new manpower, and new land to exploit. The African slave trade was created to accommodate this expansion. So now, this right here is very interesting. And I want to read something to you, because I think as we begin to, and please bear with me just for a moment as I turn around, and I want to make sure that I give you the correct information as it relates to this time period. Okay. Now, this is, for those of you who may know or may not know who he is, I want to read, and this comes from the book, The Africans Who Wrote the Bible by Nene Benche Dakwa, Dr. Dakwa. This Catholic Church approval of the enslavement of Africans. Now, when I was a young person and they talked about the slave trade, they never really talked about the Catholics' role in it. Now, I'm not on the platform to talk about Catholics or anything like that, but we have to be honest about what's going on. Okay, we have to be honest about history, because how can we heal as a people, regardless of race, if we don't talk about what went on and what happened? So now this, the Catholics gave their approval, they gave their blessing. They gave their blessing to enslave African people. And that affected many of our ancestors. Okay, so I want to read this. The Catholic Church stepped in to protect its interests in Portuguese plunder and exploitation of foreign lands by protecting the Portuguese from Western Europe incursions into Portuguese foreign territories. In 1514, Pope X issued a papal bull forbidding all Western European countries from interfering in Portuguese foreign lands. Pope Leo X also gave the Portuguese merchants, the Catholic Church, formal permission to openly take Africans as slaves because they were pagans. Now, first of all, let's stop right there. The church gave permission from people who lived in Portugal. They gave them permission to go into African land and take slaves because they were pagans. That's just like if a person says, now let's just say that from a keeping it on a personal level. That's just like me saying that I have the right to go to someone's home. Let's say someone gave me permission to go to someone's home, to take their stuff, to take their people, because they don't believe the same thing I believe. That type of thinking during that time period lets you know just what they thought at that time about African people. It gave the Catholic Church justification for putting our ancestors on those slave ships. And then I want to read further. An issue I have never understood is how could the religion practice of the Africans that imagined and created the concept of God be paganism, and the practice of worship of the same God by Europeans would be Christianity that is supposed to be better. And so, of course, what the author is saying is that many of the Africans, okay, who gave the world the ideal of God, okay, some of the earlier ideals of God was then turned and called pagan, all right? And that is something that we're not going to talk in this presentation about, but I do talk about in further presentation. So I want to move on. So what did we learn? We learned that the Catholic Church gave the Portuguese permission to start the slave trade, to take slaves, because they were unbelievers. So now we go from that to the Reformation and the scramble for Africa in 1517. Now this, of course, is Martin Luther. And of course, we know that he did the 99 Theses, right? October the 31st, 1517 AD. So now the scramble of Africa and all those things, all of that, leads to eventually the division of the African continent between all these different groups of Europe as they were fighting for resources and land. But I don't want to go all the way to Africa. I want to bring it back here. Okay. So now these are just some images that I thought were important as we begin to look at the fall. And you say now, okay, so how are we bringing this to women? We're bringing it to women because if we look at this woman on this on this block to be sold, no longer is she seen as a personification of nature, personification of the universe. No longer is she seen as a connection with potency of biology. None of that stuff we talked about earlier is being applied now. The Black woman is no longer a person. She's no longer seen as an equal, nor is the man, nor is the children. But we're talking about Black women today. So we have this, and of course, this is a rendering. So now, what do you think this Black woman is thinking now about herself, about who she is? And then we have this woman being branded by this, whoever this person is, this crook, right? This a slave owner, a slave merchant. She's being disrespected. She's being branded like cattle. So no longer is she's going to have these ideas of being a mother, of being someone who is respected in the community. What do you think this is doing to her self-esteem as a person? And of course, we have this with the man, the woman, and the child, which they probably going to split up. So now you have the breaking of the family. So the woman's protection, her husband, okay, the one who during the ancient world was there to make sure that she was protected and taken care of, right? That's being taken from her. Her child is being taken from her. Okay. And then the left, we have this sister and this family and children working. Okay, look at these young babies out here picking cotton. So, we talked about Egypt and education and all of that. And it's not to say that children didn't work on the farm, but this forced labor, okay, already the self-esteem of the community is being damaged. So now, we talked about the slave trade. We talked about the Catholics' role in it. So now let's look more, as I had illustrated, the destruction of the Black self-image. Now let's look at this. Let's look at this racist postcard of 1909. Now, this postcard was actually being, disseminated to people, to white people, right? During this time, this was something that, they probably got a joke of. And it is, "I so happy," is what it says at the bottom. And we see that, she's smiling and she got a doll next to her. And, and honestly, I'm gonna be honest with you. If it's hot outside and I'm eating some watermelon, wouldn't you be happy too? But the point is that they made fun of them. You're making fun of Black children. That has a strong effect on a mother when she's come across a postcard and her children is on there being made fun of. But I don't want to move too ahead. Now, many of you who read this book, The Negro a Beast in the Image of God. So now, when we talk about Black women, we're talking about the fall of Black women, the slave trade, okay, the branding, the forced labor, the separation of her husband and her children. All this affected her. Okay, then they begin to have publications, because remember, Pope Leo and all of them and all these people in these different high societies had to justify the enslavement. So they call them pagan. So now, not only do they not worship God, but are they even in the image of God? Not only are they just pagan and they just, doing some things that are unchristian, but can they really even be Christian if they're not human? So let's read this. In 1900, Charles Carroll published The Negro a Beast, or In the Image of God. Carroll claimed that white people were made in God's likeness and Black people were soulless, immoral beasts. He asserted that race mixing would wreck God's plan. So he even took it further than what I said. Not only are we a beast, but we soulless. We don't even have a soul. We don't even have a soul. And of course, I recommend everybody to go to this website where I got the information. So now, if you're a Black woman, and look how they got my brother on the book, okay? There's truly just disrespecting the Black man, the Black family, the Black woman, the Black child. So we went from queens and kings and women of respect in Africa to now we don't even have souls. Our men don't have souls. Our children don't have souls. So here is the continuing destruction of Black people and Black women. So now, this comes from Brother Azaze Jabari's book, The Seven Little White Lies, The Conspiracy to Destroy the Black Self-Image. Now, this right here is so interesting. This cartoonist propaganda, I'm so appreciative that he put it in his book. The racist cartoon from 1895 issued the Puck magazine entitled Taking Out the Kink. A caricature of an African-American woman reads a hair-raising ghost story. While she is terrified, she finds that her straightened hair is actually a good thing. The cartoon recalls the painful history of the lower status that was established during the enslavement for African features. So now, we look at this cartoon, and if you see in the beginning of the cartoon, the Black woman with the kinky hair is happy, right? She don't seem to have no problem at all right? It wasn't until she read a book about taking out the kinks that all of a sudden now she's afraid, so the hair gets straight. And now she sees herself as beautiful. Oh, she loves this straight hair. So she's fixing it up. Now she got pride. But honestly, she had pride in the beginning. So what is it doing? It's telling women to relearn who you are as inferior. To relearn who you are is not good enough. The hair texture, the kinkiness of the hair. And how many women are still suffering with this today? How many of our brothers and sisters, but women particularly, right, because who we're talking about, don't appreciate how God made them? The way that our hair and our texture, because of racist caricatures that begin to damage the self-Black image of the woman. It's important to note that we didn't come to this place with that hatred for ourselves. It was because it was designed and propagated upon us to have that dislike of who we are. So now, we talked about the separation of the woman from her man, the branding being less than, the woman, the man soulless, we don't have souls. All of this had an effect on the self-esteem of Black women, as well as all of the Black nations, men, children. But now, they also attacked the Black woman in her sacred womb, or the womb of the woman. So now I want to read this. The movie 12 Years a Slave depicted the real reality of Black women and the rape culture that existed in the United States between mostly white male slave owners and their Black female slaves. Now, first of all, she did a great job in this movie. But just imagine that. Imagine not being in control. And this is a culture, systematic culture that was existing during this time period. And even here, look, we have the women on the auction block, once again, being treated as cattle, being treated as less than. Same thing, no difference. Being treated as less than, disrespected. You know, she didn't want his hands on her. How much did that affect generations after generations? How much of this still affects women, Black women, generations after generations? The sexual abuse of slaves was partially rooted in the patriarchal Southern culture, which treated all women, Black and white, as property. Although Southern mores regarded white women as dependent and submissive, Black women were often co-signed to a life of sexual exploitation. Many women were raped and had little control over their families. Children, free women, indentured servants, and men were not immune from abuse by masters and owners. So even children and even men was sodomized. Okay. Neil Urban, painter, also explained that the psychological outcome of such treatment often had the same results: soul murder. Children, especially young girls, were often subjugated to sexual abuse by their masters, children, and relatives. So look, this was a generational abuse that was going on with Black women. So when Black women cry, when Black women act the way, sometimes we might get upset about certain things. Sometimes one good book is, I think it's called Post-Slave Syndrome. Many of us, and I say us, I'm talking about the Black community, not just in America, but wherever we went, right? When we had to be subjugated to all of these different types of abuses, whether we was in the Americas, whether we was in Europe, or whether we was in the islands, Brazil, this had an effect on the woman and on the family, and that it was generational. Okay. So now, continuing on with the abuse of the womb, right? So we still with the abuse of the womb, all right, the sexual abuse. Then we had the surgical and doctoral and in the medical abuse that was going on with women. Now, this is James Marion Sims, and he was seen as a person who developed really gynecology and tools of gynecology, and he was really praised until certain things about him started to come to light. So developed pioneering tools and surgical techniques related to women's reproductive health, and is credited as the father of modern gynecology, okay? Or gynecology. In the 19th century, physician has been ionized with statues of the New York City, Southern California, Pennsylvania. But because Sims' research was conducted on enslaved Black women without anesthesia. Now, hold on. How many people knew that? So he was praised, had statues in New York, California, Carolina, Pennsylvania. He's a modern of gynecology, but here's his background. His research was conducted on enslaved Black women without anesthesia. Medical ethics historians and others have called for those monuments to be removed, or for them to be reconfigured as tributes to enslaved women. I don't know how you can do that. I don't know how you can reconfigure a monster to give Black women some attributes or tributes. I don't see that. Women known to have endured his experiments. So now, I want us to look at this. I think this is the one that was in New York. He was praised as the father of gynecology, women's reproductive health. But nobody knew that this was going on. Look at this sister. She looks afraid. She got a hand on her chest. She could be praying, and he's just looking at her. And I know this is just a picture, but then you have these women in the back who's like, oh Lord, we next. But at the same time, they have this show of concern because they know this woman is about to go through some tremendous pain. There's no anesthesia. He's trying these new instruments on this Black woman, attacking her womb. So I want to read something. Because even then, even during that time period, they knew that they were doing the wrong thing. And I thought, let's see, even during that time in slavery, he knew he wasn't doing the right thing. And I want to read, this is from the book Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. And this is on page 59. Now, there was criticism for some of these practices, and I want to read it. Such pointed criticism may help to explain why some physician scientists who spoke candidly, okay, of injecting, dosing, and performing revolutionary surgeries on their slave patients in the first half of the 19th century expressed their actions more guardedly in later writings. So in later writings, they start protecting it because now they know that the word is out and people are starting to see the just horrors of what they were doing. For example, Dr. James Marion Sims eventually hid his subject's race and even illustrated reports of experiments on Black slave women with illustrations of middle-class white medical doctors, matrons. So now he's starting to hide, okay? Because he knew he was wrong. And what's sad is they knew that even in that time that he was doing wrong, but it took 2017 before his monument to even be removed. So now, attacking the Black woman through her children during Jim Crow. Now, honestly, they were already attacking her children during slavery, okay? But even during Jim Crow, when we're out of slavery, okay, they were still attacking the Black woman and her children. In this 1916 Cream of Wheat ad, a Pickaninny boy whose stolen apples runs from a dog that torn open the backside of his pants. Like now, wait a minute. Now y'all really need to if you can, click on this source, because there's so many things that this brother have on his website that was shocking to me. Because I remember eating cream of wheat. And you telling me that cream of wheat had a 1916 ad showing this boy who was probably poor, probably got these apples for his brother and sister, getting bit by a pit bull, and that's supposed to be cute. That's supposed to be, I don't understand. No, the problem is they're putting this boy on here to let the women and the men know, look, at the end of the day, this is what we think of you. This is how we think of your children. And if that wasn't bad enough, the nigger milk joke was a popular gag in the 1920s. Cartoon shows of a Black baby drinking ink. Now, how is that just not horrifying? I mean, just look at this. Who would do something like that? Who would think that that is something that you should do? Unless you're trying to make people feel worse, bad, inferior, not worth anything. Would you put a baby drinking ink? These depictions put fear in the hearts of many African-American mothers. You know, we talk about, mothers telling their sons, to protect themselves, police and things like that. But it started, with things like this. That would put fear in a mother when she sees these things and how society thinks of her children. And then we have some more. And then this gets to and a lot of these, if you notice, are males. Okay. A running inward target with bullet holes from the 1960s. They attacking the Black woman's child. Sometimes you just got to look at it. And then if this wasn't bad enough, Bullseye Bill is a baby. This piece is an undated book of dart targets. Why would you want to put a dart on a baby? Just thinking about that, I'm having an effect of how sad that is. I wouldn't want my child to go anywhere. If these are the games that people are playing, you shooting, he's running for his life. So now they going hunting, they're doing practice. All right, let me move on. Graphic images of Black children being eaten by alligators were popular souvenir postcards, even in the 1930s. Now, how is this a popular souvenir? We remember we talking about Black women today. They know that this right here is going to put fear in that Black woman. And look, this boy is in pain in this post. I want to know who is the artist that said, okay, look, I think that what would be a good picture is, let me get an alligator and put a Black boy in his mouth. So now I wanted to end it with that doll test in Italy, to also show that what happened in the slave trade, because remember I told you, wherever we went, okay, whatever happened, and we were demonized, the children was seen as less than, as less desirable, as less wanted. It had an effect on them, and that affected the Black woman, because children are, and they are a blessing to the family. They're the jewels, right, of the family. And for your child, even if you're not a mother, okay, if you're an aunt or an uncle and your nieces and nephews who are seeing themselves as bad, if you look at some of that little girl wanted to cry. That little boy was having a really bad, they were struggling in that doll test. Because they realized that they were, not only did they see themselves as that, but the world saw them as inferior and bad too. And the point of the presentation, and you probably said, well, okay, you started with us being queens, you started with us talking about cosmology and all of these great Nzingas and Hypatia, and you started talking about Lady Pritchett as the first documented doctor, and then you're going to end with the slave trade. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because I wanted to be honest about where we are today. But I don't want to end there, right? The point of this presentation is to remember who you are, to remember how Africa looked at Black women, how Africa, the mother of civilization, how the mother of Africa and the African ancestors looked at you, looked at the Black woman, looked at women in general, but particularly the Black woman today. No matter of the slave trade, no matter what happened in Jim Crow, it does not take away who and what you are. Remember who you are. From Amos Nefertari of the 17th dynasty to Kamala Harris, right? And these are just a brief, right, figures. No matter what we go through, we have to remember who we are, and that time changes a lot of things. Who would have thought that we would get to this point right here? It's not perfect. We still have this discrimination that exists, and women, regardless of ethnicity and race, are still not equal in a sense. But we are progressing, and we are making changes. But as we do these things, I want us to remember who we are. And I thank you for listening to me today. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. So again, I want to thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you have a wonderful holiday, and I'll see you next year, hopefully and prayerfully. Okay, bye-bye.